what I want to do first is have Lawrence and Mimi describe their another associated project with Open and Emergency, and the work they did around letters, and then maybe we can explore that and gauge interest in the tarot cards as well, just to see, you know, what might be, you know, of most interest to people in attendance.
Okay, so I guess I'll start. Thank you, Jason. So part of the original Open Emergency project was a set of letters, and they are daughter to mother letters. And I was trying to think about an important way to frame them, but the first thing that comes to mind is just that one of them is in like really bad handwriting. And to think about the process, we kept asking the writer to rewrite it, and it kept getting worse.
She apologized. She's like, I can't do any better than this. This is it.
This is it. And we were like, all right, this is it. And I feel like there's some like larger, something allegorically important there. But also like that, it just makes me think of the journaling exercise and how there's important overlap, because it, like, in some ways this was a journaling kind of engagement, because it was, I think for some of the writers, and as we've engaged this as an exercise over time working with particularly kind of like young people, but not always students, it's like an imagined letter to one's parents. And so in that sense, it is like never meant to be read, or I think there's a safety in writing it, or a greater feeling of safety if one says to oneself, I'm writing this to my parents, but they will never actually see it. And so I can write it in a different way than I actually would write it if I were actually intending them or thinking that they might find it. But then I don't know that it always stays in that form. Like, I think there's something that there's a kind of release that comes with writing, and with that release of not only like the venting of emotion and feeling, but there is like that communicative energy where it becomes like, well, I wrote this not intending to have my parents see it, but that maybe what eventually comes out, I do maybe want them to read it. And I think some of the people that we commissioned to write letters actually did sit down and want to write it with the intention of it being something to be shared. They all were handwritten. And I think,
Except for one.
No, there's one that was like typewriter written, right?
Yeah, Aaron's is typed. But we intended them to be handwritten. We wanted the intimacy of that.
Yeah.
We wanted to, I mean, the whole reason we have letters in the first place in Open Emergency, you know, like the tarot card being one form, we have a hack to DSM as another form, and then the letters as another form, is because we try to think about what form would best capture family dynamics and family relationships. Because in my experience of talking with students, and again, actually of encountering Aaron Ning's work on family dynamics and power dynamics in families, that Asian American families are very fraught places. And how do we reveal the forces that shape those relationships? How do we reveal the contours of those relationships? And I felt like letter writing between children and their parents would be a way to not only reveal what it looks like in those intimate, what we think of as private spaces and relationships, but also allow for a kind of communication that may or may not actually exist in those relationships. And so we approached people who we personally knew had interesting relationships with their families, and who we thought might be willing to kind of explore those relationships in a letter form. And we wanted it handwritten for a certain kind of intimacy. We actually printed it and put it in an envelope in the project, so it would feel like an actual letter that you would pull out. Only one was not handwritten, in part just because of length, and so it didn't fit as a handwritten letter. But I also feel like the writer perhaps didn't want it to be handwritten as well, as like in terms of that, wanted to actually forego that kind of intimacy in the handwritten letter. So we were open to that too, if people wanted different kinds of forms in the ways they wrote the letters. So like Lawrence was saying, the letters were envisioned as like obviously you don't have to send the letter, right? It's part of our prompt for our writers. But for them, it was also difficult because they knew this would be a published project, so that the letters could get in the hands of their parents if their parents could read in the language that they're writing in. And I think that did color some people's, feelings about the letters.
Because in many cases, first generation immigrant Asian American parents are likely to buy obscure Asian American arts journals.
Right. So it was
just in the off chance their children are writing letters about them. But yes,
there's still like there's the fear of it being public, right? And not only their parents, but just because it's a public piece of writing, anybody encountering that kind of vulnerability and revealing. So I think that was challenging for some of the writers. But for some of them, they also like ran with it. They're like, I'm gonna air out the dirty laundry. It's like, this is my space now to reveal all the fucked up shit in my relationship with my family, and speak to these experiences that they didn't feel they had the ability to speak to before. And so we were wanted to give them that kind of space to do that kind of emotional work too. So the letters really run the gamut in terms of tone, feeling, content, and we wanted that too. We wanted a really wide range of what it means to think about our relationships in our families. So there are some angry letters, there are some loving letters, there's gratitude, there's ingratitude.
There's a kind of breadth of, because it's all daughters.
Expansively.
But expansively, so thinking expansively about gender identity and expression and like the shapes that daughterhood can take. There's also a kind of multi-generational, if any of you are familiar with Joy Kogawa, who's a Japanese Canadian novelist who's like won a boatload of awards and is known for this kind of seminal novel about incarceration in Canada called Obasan. So let's see.
When we approached Joy,
this was like the granddaughter wrote one.
She decided, instead of writing a letter to like her mother, she was like, I'm gonna write letters. I'm gonna have my daughter and my granddaughter, all three of us, write letters together. And that was kind of an amazing, her own formal experiment inside our formal experiment. And then some of the letters were like recipe cards, which I thought was super fascinating. That's like literal recipe that turned into metaphorical recipe at one point, as a way of communication. It was quite beautiful and fun. One of our writers, was it Kit Yan, who wrote who folded up the paper and then wrote in all like different corners of the paper. So there's no orientation to the paper. You have to like spin it around as you read it and read it in the creases. And then we had another writer, I think Rika, who wrote in like marker or crayon, which is a very different feeling to how she wrote about her experience as a trans woman and trying to talk about gender identity with her family and choosing a very thick marker to do it in. Erin Ning, who I've mentioned already, who's the author of the book Ingratitude, which is the scholarly examination into daughterhood in Asian American families. I asked her because she's like the genesis of so much of my thinking around daughterhood and filial debt and power dynamics in immigrant families. I asked her to write a letter, and at first she was like, too hard. Like, it's one thing to do scholarship on it. I don't want to write my own stuff. And I said, okay. And then I think a couple months later, out of nowhere, I get a text or a phone call, and she's like, I'm ready. I'm ready to write a letter. I will have it to you tomorrow. Because some shit happened with her family, right? And she was ready. And so her letter is quite powerful, and it's comes out of conflict with her mom, now layered with, because Erin is now a mom and has a young son. And so for her as a parent, renegotiating her parents now as grandparents and how they want to be involved in her son's life, but also the way they parented her comes kind of back, and then the way they want her to parent her son, it all becomes these messy layers that are both triggering, but also force you to like refigure out who you are as a person and a parent and a daughter. And I feel like I've experienced something similar, becoming a parent, having to rethink my relationship to my own parents. What does it mean to be a daughter now that they have grandchildren that they want to be involved with? And so that letter explores that dynamic, not only beautifully, but also, I don't know what I'm looking for. It's like a punch to the gut, to her mama's gut. So I highly recommend reading that letter. It's hard, but really, really powerful. So I taught these letters in my classes, especially Asian American Studies classes, especially a class on second generation Asian Americans, meeting the children of immigrants. That is a water bottle that Lawrence routinely kicks over. That drives me crazy. So I've taught these letters, and students have found them hard to read, but very generative. Oh, one of the letters actually is written by one of my former students. It's Raven Anand, that's her pseudonym, and she actually wrote a version of this letter as a final paper for my class on second generation Asian Americans. And when I read it, I was like, do you want to be a part of this project? Because the letter is so profoundly gut-wrenching as it explores her relationship to her parents as a college student, and also as a survivor of sexual violence, and what that means to try to disclose that to her family and negotiate that as a student, and then struggling with mental health and PTSD issues. And for me, it was amazing to have a student write this letter out of a class assignment that now can then be published in a way that can return back, right, as into the classroom, into a space that allows other students now to ask questions and say things that they didn't feel like they were allowed to before. So I often teach this letter, and I use it as a prompt. And the prompt that I ask folks when I use this letter, especially with students, is I say, read some of the letters. Here's a couple that I particularly recommend. And then if you were to write a letter to your parents, caregivers, family members, what are things that you wish you could say that you haven't said before? And I start the prompt out that way because I want to get directly at the unsaid things, the things that people don't feel like they have permission to say, so that they don't spend the letter doing the things they're supposed to say first, right? Doing all the compulsory, like, I love you and gratitude and I appreciate all your sacrifices bullshit, right? Like, we can move past that. And what are the things that you wish you could say? A prompt that I've borrowed from Jim Lee, who is another Asian American Studies scholar who has also been a part of Open Emergency, that I know he does in his classes, he's shared with me and I've borrowed it, is what would you say, I'm paraphrasing him, what would you say if, one, there are no consequences to what you said? And what would you say if you did not have to first be grateful? Like, what would you say if you were not worried about being called ungrateful? Like, if you could compartmentalize that and not worry about being called ungrateful or a bad child, what does that open up for the ability to say? And I find that prompt really powerful because it allows students and anybody who's writing actually to bracket, to actually have someone identify that fear that they maybe didn't realize was there, then bracket that fear and try to write something else that they weren't allowed to write? What would you say? What would you say, you know, that you haven't been allowed to say, that you feel like you haven't been allowed to say, that you felt you couldn't say? What would you say if you didn't worry about being called ungrateful?
Are we setting up prompts for actual writing
I
now?
don't know.
Jason, are we about to like embark on some co-letter writing now?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have the space for that. And, you know, the way that you've set it up with this beautiful discussion, you know, I think, and with Alina's, you know, helpful, you know, journaling exercise, I feel prompt, you know, like ready to do that. But if there's another direction you feel is valuable, you know, like we should do that. But I think this is a great exercise, and I think, I mean, I'm already, my head is spinning already, thinking about the things that that I might ask without consequences.
Why don't we take a little time to write, and then we can.
How about like 10 minutes or
share.
something to, I don't know how to gauge these times. Lena was really good at.
Yeah, I'll keep time.
Well, you need to take to write. I have
Yeah.
no idea how long to wait for people to write, but let's take some time and write. If I was not prepared and don't have, you know, lovely music in the background, if anyone else wants to play music for us while we take a little time to write, and then maybe we can, if people feel open to sharing, when we come back.
Can I throw out one more prompt?
Sure.
I'm gonna invoke, since Mimi already invoked Jim, Jim Lee, I'm gonna draw from like something he's semi-famous like in Asian American studies circles for saying as a prompt, because I love it and return to it a lot. He likes to say, like, with his students frequently, he's also a pastor, so I think this is for his parishioners too, is the idea that, like, I'm gonna walk you up to the edge of the abyss, but I won't leave you there alone. I'll stand there with you. So thinking about a letter to one's parent, what abyss do you need to walk to the edge of and stand beside your parent with and look at together? What do you need them to see? And what abyss do they need to see with you standing next to them, holding their hand and not leaving them? So on that note, let's write some letters.
I know. On that note, go. I think, Jason, you're wanting to write the questions into the chat.
Mhm.
So let's do it for all all attendees can see it.
Oh, I'm sorry, I wrote it to you. Gosh,
No worries.
sorry about that.
Like, I know my question. Why are you telling me my question?
You know, personally, what I'd say
I
to
know,
my
you're
parents
asking
if
me
there are
personally?
consequences?
Thank you for typing that up. So yeah, if you could type that up to the rest of the attendees can see, and then we'll take a few minutes. And then I would love if someone else could play lovely music for us in the background.
I'm happy to continue with the playlist I have, if that
Thank
vibe
you.
works. Yeah, no problem. Let's see.
Thanks for the music. So usually when we do these kinds of writing things, we ask people to share about the experience, but not necessarily the letter itself, because those are probably very private and vulnerable and difficult. But you're also welcome to if you want to share snippets of letters that you've been working on. But if not, I would love to hear from folks who are writing kind of just what the experience brought up for them, what it was like to think about what to write, what it was like to write. Did you write something unexpected? Did it bring up things that you didn't realize you wanted to talk about? And I'm going to call on the panelists just to share a little bit if you were writing.
Yeah, I can share.
Thank you.
So I wrote to my family asking about why my parents decided to leave Hawaii. They left before I was born and moved to Indiana. And so I was born and raised in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And so I did get to know Hawaii quite, pretty well from kind of visiting pretty often. But eventually it became really impractical and too expensive to do, to sustain that connection. And, I sensed from them a kind of loss of leaving family and being so far away from that space and going to a place that's so really different. And kind of asking them, do they feel at home? Do they, what have they lost? And kind of, in that question, I realized that I've lost what they've lost because of my connection with them. And so just, led me to think about those other, to ask them more about their experience, because I know at times they haven't felt at home in Indiana, but to what degree do they feel at home anywhere after being gone from Hawaii for so long? So that opened up, the chance to kind of ask about those things that have been a part of, smaller conversations, but, I think giving myself the chance to open that door, and to think about those, help me to kind of take the next step. And I think that's what the form of the letter really helps, is it takes a kind of feeling or emotional of stance and it lets you explore that, as a, and how your parents, how you think that they might fill those questions, and it lets you develop that conversation more for yourself, so it doesn't exist just as like a question.
Yeah, I appreciate the idea of that you're articulating around the letter being a way to push yourself to formulate, right?
Mm-hmm.
A question in deeper ways than the way it might just kind of float around in the back of your mind.
Yeah.
And then you can figure out from there whether you actually want to ask it or not, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like that intermediate step for you to articulate to yourself, what is the question? What is the thing that I want to say that I have that's kind of been on the back burner?
Mm-hmm.
Mm. Yeah, I like also the idea of it being like a kind of release where you're entering into a process that you don't have complete control over, and that your kind of unconscious emotional mind is going to insert some things into there, or will direct the direct the letter in the ways that it wants, or the heart wants the letter wants what the letter writing heart wants, and like some of those things.
That's right.
And that like you have to kind of give yourself over to that a little bit, and that like at the end of it is going to be most likely something that you didn't necessarily calculate or envision.
Mhm.
There's an element of like almost like channeling, I feel like, that can happen with both journaling, right? Like in Alina's exercises, and then in the epistolary form, the letter, like as an outlet and channel, something that you may not always have control over.
Mhm.
I'll share really quick and then I have to leave, but I really appreciate the detail in the prompt about if you don't have to worry about being ungrateful, like you can skip all that. And it was funny because as I was writing to my family members, I still found myself
You wanted to do it.
kind of like nice in my language. And I was just like, no, just be honest. And it's like if we can't be honest with ourselves, who can we be honest with? But sometimes being honest with ourselves is the hardest to be honest with. So it was a good, like a powerful moment of just let yourself be honest with yourself.
Yeah. And that really says something that even when you're writing, you know, it's just for yourself. That the compulsion is so powerful and so deep-seated, right? In the way we understand ourselves as daughters and sons and children, that you have to fight it. You have to actually resist it and not have to like insert, you know, I love yous or like, you know, qualify things you say by like preemptively expressing some kind of gratitude or expressing something, right? And so like for me, that prompt has also forced me to like, I catch myself, right? And then I show my students ways of like catching that way of being with your parents. It is asking you to be a very different kind of child. And I think that can be really challenging for some of my students. When I do this, they're like, they can't do it. It's just like, I can't, you're asking me to be something that I'm terrified of being. So even to myself. And that's really powerful, I think, to like acknowledge that. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Alina.
Thank you. So when I was writing this, I you know, I was writing for myself, and I've had writer's block for a long time, you know. And one of the things that I often think about when I'm like driving in the car is how my upbringing has kind of turned me into what kind of parent I am today, you know. I think when I was younger, I was much angrier at my parents, and as you get older, you learn about trauma and how it affects them, you know, and that probably wasn't easy for them. So my son, one of my sons is back here. He just came into the room, but I was able to start writing, and I can share what I wrote. If that's okay.
That'd be wonderful.
Yeah, thank you.
Now that I have children, I would have turned towards your anger. My son, when they're mad, are just like you. Their small footsteps flourishing into landmines as they run up the stairs crying like hungry ghosts. How this multitude of anger can possess such small frames, I don't know. What I know is I don't want to be fearful or angry, that I wish I could plant mustard greens in their path to comfort their fits. I want to tell them that it's not easy to wrap my arms around them and tell them I am not shell-shocked and angry that they are angry.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, I keep revisiting you know, how I respond to when they're upset, you know. And I think the way we're raised, right, especially with even with the tar cards, the way we're raised as children of refugees, if they don't talk about the war, they talk about it in passing, right? So you don't understand what they're going through, or how there are moments that trigger them to who they were when they were in the killing fields, right? And I think about kind of like this exercise has allowed me to kind of think about a little bit more about like the traumas that I'm seeing and how it keeps replaying itself, you know? So thank you for that exercise.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
It also makes me think about like not just what traumas they've experienced, but what we inherit and what that inheritance, like its shape, what it looks like. I think it's different than what people might expect those inheritances to be. And so I love that you're sort of exploring that in your own fatherhood.
And like so powerfully with your child on screen as you're reading, it's like there's like the kind of bravery and beauty of like confronting that that kind of inner history with your child with you, as like, this is the work that we're doing together going forward.
Yeah, he ran upstairs because he wanted to go downstairs. He wanted me to go downstairs because he doesn't want to hang out with his mom and his brother. Right when this exercise started. No. Yeah.
Thank you.
Dad's reading powerful poetry right now.
He's like, I don't care.
He wants to go to his favorite restaurant right now. I told him that's what we'll do tonight.
It's time to... Thank you. Well, Jason, we're going to hand it over to you.
Thank you.
We kind of close things up. Thank you so much, and thank you for everyone who's participated. Especially, I know this particular thing is the letter writing can be very intimate and raw, and so I thank everybody for doing the work and for sharing it.
Thank you, Mimi. Thank you, Lawrence. This is so wonderful to have you with us and to share all of these incredible practices that you've been developing and inventing. And you know, this is what I hope, this is how I want Asian American studies to be practiced. And you know, and I think the way that we inform the work with our experiences and with the journeys that we're on, I think just enriches it, and it makes it so much more than, you know, a book with a Dewey Decimal you know, kind of, you know, notation on it. And this is wonderful. So thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you for all the other co-panelists. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Kenny.
Take care, guys. So what I wanted to do now was, I mean, just in reflection to of what Mike had shared, I thought maybe it would be appropriate to read a couple tarot cards in parting, just in relationship to the work that we've done with journaling and with exploring history and literature. You know, these are all, you know, aspects of Asian American studies that I think are important to keep in mind in thinking about our mental health. And so I'll read 2 more cards, and then I think that'll be it for our program. But while I'm doing so, if you would like to leave any comments or questions, or other kinds of parting words, I encourage you to use the chat to do that, and so everyone can benefit from that. But I wanted to, you know, Mike's when Mike shared his letter, it made me think of this this card. It is the Village. Right there. I think it is backwards to you. So Kenny, if you can pull up the Village card and put that on the shared screen, that would be awesome. But I'll read it nevertheless. The Village is the 27th card in the major arcana. It sits in the ruins of ancestral knowledge. It is grandmothers tending gardens of bitter greens, shoes piled on at the front door, intergenerational laughter, ever full cups of tea. It is also policed identities and forced filial piety, with burning fields, horrors of fleeing, and the roar of airplanes always in the background. Yet the Village never loses the promise of continual reunion and seasonal rebirth. It can be populated with who you choose, a place of belonging you built with exquisite intention and care. When this card appears in a reading, it signals that it is time to tend to your village. The forces that ignite the survival instinct will be different for each generation. If you need to leave, who are the allies to bring with you on this migration? And what vision of the village will you carry with you? Who will you invite into the beloved community of your making? If you stay, strengthen alliances, familial or chosen, in the face of destruction that is inevitable for every village. Embrace and beware the potential of the collective. It takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to raise a child. That's R-A-Z-E. Our doom is as shared as our liberation. Jean St. Patrick wrote that one. And then I'm going to end by reading this card, which is the Ancestor card. This is by Gerald Ma. The Ancestor is the 9th card in the Major Arcana, sometimes mistaken as purely familial. The Ancestor is of the imagination, but the historical one, nearing the halfway point in the Major Arcana. The Ancestor symbolizes the chasmus one tends to make between past and present when one makes sense of history. In the lower half, there is a heart. Its bloodlines look like a nest, and its shape a bird itself. The heart symbolizes nothing but the heart. Systole, diastole, ventricle, aorta. Note the position of the nest, especially in relation to the birds. They work on different planes. The human history one seeks so ardently to see in nature can only come perpendicular to the animist world. The card's lesson is that a human life is nothing but a bundle of tales. Those who seek wise words from the Ancestor should first cover your left ear with your left hand and right eye with your right, while recounting a story about an ancestor who you have never met. Then cover your right ear with your left hand and your left eye with your right, while recounting a story from an ancestor you have met. Finally, hold your tongue with both hands while improvising a story that incorporates an object from each of the above stories. One has become you. So it's with that I'm going to close this this meeting, and I want to thank everyone for coming and for participating. And please do keep an eye out for the mental health workbook we'll be sharing with you, and please reach out and share anything that you feel has been transformative for you in this experience or with the workbook. I hope you enjoy it, hope you use it, and share it. I see Simi there. Hello, Simi. Thank you for all your artwork and all of your wonderful words in the tarot deck. And so thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening, and look forward to being in touch. Bye now.